Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. It was the night of the gala, the one I had been working toward for years, and everything felt like it was finally falling into place. I had barely believed it when I was told I'd been selected as the Young Visionary of the Year in Sustainable Architecture. I remember hearing the words, feeling my heart stop for a moment before the reality of it sank in. The recognition, the respect, it was everything I had worked for. The rooftop was exactly how I imagined it. Twinkling lights overhead, an elegant crowd of architects, investors, and visionaries gathered under the stars. The perfect backdrop for my moment of triumph. I stood there in a tailored black dress, the award plaque weighing heavily in my hands, feeling like the spotlight was finally on me. "Please welcome Ava Bremer." The host's voice boomed over the microphone, and I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the wooden stage. The applause was warm, genuine. It felt like my years of hard work had paid off. I smiled, trying to hold back the rush of emotions. My parents, my colleagues, and even the people who didn't believe in me, this was my time. The microphone was handed to me, and I moved to the center of the stage, my eyes scanning the crowd. Then, just as I began to speak, a screech of feedback interrupted the air. I flinched, my hands tightening around the award, and everyone looked up toward the noise, the sound echoing unnervingly. And then I saw him. Mick, my estranged uncle. He stormed to the microphone, his face flushed with a mix of anger and something I couldn't quite place. His eyes locked onto me, narrowing in a way that made my stomach churn. A few gasps rippled through the audience, as if they too realized something was about to go terribly wrong. Is this the great architect? The visionary who cleaned out foreclosed homes just to make it through college? Mick's voice cut through the air like a blade. "The family janitor," he added with a sneer, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter echoed across the rooftop. My heart dropped. I felt the room closing in around me, the laughter like a tight coil, pulling everything that had been beautiful about this night into something grotesque. You know, Ava here might have a plaque, but she sure didn't get it from talent. Nah, she just cleaned up everyone else's mess. Mick continued, feeding off the crowd's laughter. I could feel their eyes on me, some sympathetic, but most just entertained. I stayed rooted in place, gripping the award plaque so tightly that my fingers started to shake. It was like someone had reached inside me and squeezed all the air out of my lungs. He was my family, and yet there he was, tearing me down in front of everyone. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but instead, I found myself standing taller. My jaw tightened as I forced a smile, fighting to hold on to my composure. The laughter continued for what felt like an eternity. I could hear Mick in the background, still egging the crowd on. His voice was a blur, drowned out by the deafening pounding of my heart. I glanced down at the award plaque in my hands. This wasn't just for me. It was for every hour I had spent working multiple jobs to put myself through college, for the nights I stayed up late, pushing past the exhaustion, learning everything I could to make this dream a reality. And I wasn't going to let Mick take that away from me. I wasn't going to let him take this moment from me. My smile didn't waver as I stepped forward, raising the microphone to my lips. The laughter gradually died down, but I didn't allow myself to look at the crowd. Instead, I kept my eyes locked on the award, the one thing that had kept me going through all the pain. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my chest. "Thank you for this recognition. It means more to me than I could ever put into words." I turned slightly toward Mick, just enough for him to know I wasn't going to shrink back. "But I'm not here because I cleaned anyone else's mess," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I'm here because I made my own path, no matter how difficult it was, and I'll keep going, no matter who tries to stop me." For a moment, there was silence. Mick's eyes flashed with something I couldn't read, but I knew. He didn't expect this. He expected me to shrink, to back down, to let the humiliation be the end of me. But this was just the beginning. I turned back toward the crowd, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer, and then I smiled, genuinely, as I looked out at the people who had been waiting to hear from me. "I'm Ava Bremer, and I am just getting started." The words felt like fire in my chest, burning away the last of the doubt. The applause that followed wasn't as loud as it should have been, but it didn't matter. I had said my piece. Mick had tried to tear me down, but in that moment, I realized something. His words didn't define me. I did. And as I stepped away from the mic, I promised myself that no matter what happened next, I wouldn't let anyone, family included, make me feel small again. I was done letting them win. Just as Mick was about to say something else, something cruel and bitter, the host cut in. "Excuse me, everyone," the host's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "We've had a slight interruption, but we have a special announcement to make." There was a slight murmur from the crowd as people turned toward the stage. I was still frozen in place, my grip on the award plaque turning my knuckles white. I didn't even notice Leo standing up until I heard his deep, soothing voice cut through the tension. "Ava," Leo called gently, but with authority. I turned toward him, my heart still racing, but his presence grounded me. Leo Sato, my husband, stood there with a calmness that only he seemed capable of exuding. His obsidian suit seemed to absorb the lights around him, making him stand out in contrast to the chaos. He stepped to the stage, and as the crowd turned to face him, there was a shift. Leo had that kind of magnetic presence, the kind that demanded respect without ever asking for it. He didn't need to announce who he was. The whispers around the room were enough to tell everyone that he was the founder of a multi-million-dollar ecotech development firm, one of the most respected in the industry. "Sorry to interrupt," Leo said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd, "but I think it's time to correct some misconceptions." Mick's face twitched, clearly irritated by Leo's interruption, but Leo wasn't finished. He pulled the mic close and smiled at me, genuine, warm, as if he knew exactly what I needed right then. I could already feel the slight shift in the room's energy. "While Ava's past might have been unconventional, I can tell you with certainty," Leo continued, "that she didn't get here by cleaning out foreclosed homes to pay her tuition. That's a small part of her story, but not the full picture." The audience, still unsettled by Mick's mockery, quieted down, and all eyes were now on Leo. Mick stood rigid, arms crossed, visibly fuming. But Leo wasn't deterred. Ava's a self-taught architect who designed her award-winning prototype while juggling 3 jobs just to make ends meet. She taught underprivileged kids in her free time, giving back when others looked the other way. She didn't get here because of luck or some handout. She worked for everything. There was a ripple through the crowd as Leo's words settled in, and I could feel myself standing a little taller. I hadn't realized just how much I had needed this. Leo wasn't just defending me, he was lifting me up, showing the world who I really was. He paused, making sure the room was with him. "Oh, and in case anyone was wondering," he added with a slight grin, "Ava's green construction startup? It just secured $9.2 million in venture funding." A gasp echoed through the room. A few people murmured in astonishment, and I felt a mix of pride and disbelief wash over me. I had worked so hard for so long, but hearing it laid out so simply, so powerfully, was something I'd never experienced before. I glanced over at Mick. His face was flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. I could almost see the pieces of his carefully constructed world cracking in real time. Leo turned to me then, smiling with quiet pride, and nodded toward the audience. "This is who Ava Bremer is, a visionary, a leader, and someone who deserves to be here as much as anyone else." For a moment, I didn't even know what to say. The applause that followed was louder this time, more genuine. It wasn't for the award, not really. It was for who I was, who I had become, someone worthy of standing in that room, even if my own family hadn't seen it until now. Leo stepped down from the stage, his hand finding mine. He squeezed it gently, a silent reassurance. I wasn't alone anymore. Mick's attempt to tear me down had only made me stronger, and Leo had just shown the world the truth of who I was. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own. The ceremony wound down as I collected myself, the weight of the night still pressing against my chest. Leo and I stood together near the exit, taking a moment to breathe before we left the rooftop. The applause still rang in my ears, but it felt distant, almost unreal. Then I saw him, Mick. He was standing just outside the elevator, leaning against the railing, eyes fixed on us with a simmering fury. The smile on his face was gone, replaced by a scowl. His arms were crossed tightly, a stance I knew well from years of dealing with his disdain. Leo and I exchanged a brief glance before he stepped forward, ready to confront whatever Mick had in store. As we approached, Mick spoke first, his voice laced with venom. "So, this is how it is now? You think you've made it, huh? Acting better than everyone else, better than your upbringing?" His words hit me like a slap, but I refused to flinch. I kept my gaze steady, though I could feel the old hurt bubbling up in my chest. "You've gone so far, haven't you?" Mick continued, shaking his head as if he were disgusted by the very air I breathed. And all this talk about hard work, don't make me laugh. Luck, Ava. It's all about luck and opportunity. Leo's jaw tightened beside me, but he didn't interrupt. I knew he would stand by me, no matter how much Mick tried to tear me down. Mick's voice lowered, almost mocking. Don't forget where you came from, kid. From a condemned trailer lot, remember? And now you think you're better than all of us. I felt the sting of his words, but this time it was different. The old Ava, the one who was never enough, who always felt like an outsider, was no longer standing here. I could feel the weight of the years of struggle, the nights spent working just to survive, and I knew the truth. Better? I repeated, keeping my voice calm, controlled. I'm not acting better. I've worked harder than you'll ever understand, Mick, but I'm done trying to prove myself to you. Mick sneered, but I wasn't finished. I turned to Leo, who had been silently listening. Actually, I said, Leo's right. I did come from that trailer lot, and I didn't just survive it, Mick. I turned it into something. Leo stepped forward, his presence commanding the space. Not only did Ava turn that lot into affordable housing, he began, his voice steady, but she quietly acquired multiple properties too. She's built something real, while you've done nothing but tear people down. The truth hit Mick like a punch, but he wasn't done. Oh, please. A girl playing mogul, Mick spat, his tone dripping with contempt. Look at her, acting like she's the next big thing. I didn't blink. You know, Mick, I remember something about you that not many people know, I said, my voice steady, but the words sharp as knives. Like how Jeanette, your lovely wife, refused to help my mother when she was dying of an autoimmune disease. I remember the phone calls, Mick, where she told my mom that her treatment wasn't worth the money, that it was too expensive. She didn't even care enough to chip in for the meds. The air between us grew heavier, the silence following my words thick with tension. Mick's face contorted, his hands clenching into fists, but he said nothing. I didn't need him to. The damage was done. You were always too busy looking down on me to ever help when it mattered, I continued, looking him dead in the eye. And now you think you can humiliate me? I don't need your approval, Mick. I don't need anyone's. The words stung, but in the best possible way. For the first time, I wasn't just taking a backseat to my family's judgment. I was standing up, taking control, and showing them who I truly was. Leo's hand found mine again, a small but grounding gesture. As Mick opened his mouth to retort, I turned to Leo and smiled softly. We're done here, I said. Leo nodded, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Let's go, he said, his voice firm, yet filled with that same quiet power he always carried. I took a deep breath, standing taller than I had in years, ready to walk away from the toxic pull of my family, no longer bound by their expectations, but free to live on my terms. The garage was quiet, save for the low hum of cars leaving the event, the sound of high heels clicking across the pavement, and the occasional muffled laughter still lingering from the gala. Leo and I had just stepped into the parking structure when he paused by the car, pulling a sleek black remote from his pocket. I was still processing everything that had happened, the mockery from Mick, the support Leo had shown me, and the strange sense of empowerment that came with it. But as Leo clicked a button on the remote, the large portable screen that had been tucked away in the corner flickered to life. Just a little demonstration, Leo said, his tone calm, but I could sense the power behind it. A sharp, metallic sound filled the space as the screen came into focus, and then images appeared, one by one, as Leo tapped a button. The first image was grainy, but unmistakable. Mick, in a hard hat, sneaking into a government-funded cleanup site. He was caught in the act, a stack of supplies under his arm, clearly stolen. The image hung there for a moment before Leo spoke again, his voice steady, but carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. You thought being born into the Bremer name protected you, he said, pausing briefly to let the words sink in. It doesn't. This is who you really are. Mick was frozen, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. His eyes flicked between the screen and me, but his face was pale, his confident swagger gone. Before Mick could respond, the second image flashed up on the screen. It showed Jeanette, clearly furious, shouting at a receptionist during a spa appointment. The words were unintelligible, but the context was clear. She had berated the poor woman, slamming her hand onto the counter, demanding a refund for a service she hadn't even used. Jeanette's face flushed crimson, her fingers twitching at her sides. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She glanced nervously at Mick, as if hoping for some sort of escape, but he was just as stunned as she was. "And then there's this," Leo continued, his voice unwavering. The third image popped up. Devin passed out drunk on a construction site, his body sprawled across a pile of drywall. The image was unflattering, to say the least, and the drunken stupor was evident in his slack expression. I could hear the quiet murmurs from the family behind us, the faint gasps of surprise from people who had always turned a blind eye to the Bremer family's issues. I didn't need to look at Devin to know he was shrinking in on himself. His face was ashen, and his posture was stiff with embarrassment. Leo paused again, making sure everyone in the garage was paying attention. "This," he said slowly, his gaze sweeping over Mick, Jeanette, and Devin, "is who you've always been. This is your legacy." I stepped forward, taking a breath. This was the moment, the one where I could truly sever myself from the past. "And for the record," I said, glancing at Leo, "I own Mick's house. It's in my real estate LLC." The shock that rippled through the family was immediate. Mick's mouth fell open, his hands trembling at his sides. Jeanette stumbled back, her face pale, her lips parting in disbelief. Even Devin, still trying to hide his shame, froze in place. Mick's voice was barely a whisper, tinged with panic. You can't." "I can," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You've been using our name, our resources, but none of it matters anymore. You don't get to make me feel small anymore, Mick. I don't need your approval. I never did." For a long moment, there was only silence. The weight of the truth hung in the air, suffocating the smugness that had once been a trademark of the Bremer family. They were exposed, no longer hidden behind the facade of success or inherited privilege. Leo turned to me, his eyes soft with pride. "You've built your own path, Ava, and now everyone can see it." I stood tall, letting the words settle. The screen was still flashing, but the shock in the garage was palpable. The truth had shattered the illusion, and for the first time in my life, I felt that my family finally saw me, not as their punching bag, not as their lesser, but as who I truly was, and it was liberating. The silence in the parking garage was thick with tension as Leo, Mick, and I stood facing one another. The weight of everything that had happened tonight seemed to press down on the air, but before it could sink any further, the unmistakable sound of a luxury sedan rolling into the garage interrupted the standoff. We all turned as the car door opened. There, stepping out with purpose, was someone I hadn't expected to see tonight. Grandmother Hilda, elegant in a teal overcoat. She stood tall, walking cane tapping with each step, moving toward us like she owned the space. Despite her age, there was no mistaking the sharpness in her eyes. She'd always been the quiet one in the family, the one who observed, never interfered. Mick's eyes widened at the sight of her, his posture stiffening with a mix of surprise and unease. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Mick's voice was shaky, clearly thrown off balance. Hilda didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, as if everything around her was beneath her concern. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single folded document. She handed it directly to me. "Ava," she said, her voice strong and unwavering, "I've stayed silent too long. It's time you knew the truth." I took the document from her hands, my pulse quickening. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the page. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was. A notarized document transferring full estate rights to me. "Grandmother," I whispered, looking up at her, a sense of disbelief flooding over me. You've given me the estate?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "I've rewritten my will a year ago, after everything I saw. I realized that you were the only one who earned your place, who built something from nothing. You're the legacy now, Ava. Not Mick, not Jeanette, not any of them." Mick's face drained of color. His mouth opened in disbelief, but no words came out. Jeanette, standing beside him, looked like she might collapse. Her expression went from smug to stunned in an instant. "You've given her everything?" Mick sputtered, his voice thick with rage. "You can't be serious. This is our family legacy." Hilda's gaze never wavered. "The family legacy?" she repeated, her tone sharp. "The legacy of jealousy, bitterness, and greed? I stayed quiet for years, hoping someone would change. But none of you did. Ava is the one who earned her place. She's the one who restored the Bremer name, and she's the one who deserves to carry it forward." Mick's face contorted with rage, but there was nothing he could say, nothing he could do to reverse the turn of events. Hilda had made her choice. She's right, Leo added, stepping forward beside me. Ava doesn't need any of you. She has everything she needs now. The weight of the words was like a final hammer blow. Mick could do nothing but stare, his pride crumbling with each passing second. Jeanette tried to recover, but it was too late. The truth had been laid bare. Mick started, his voice faltering. You. He trailed off, unable to form a coherent sentence. I stepped closer to him, holding the document in my hands. I've spent my life proving myself to people who never believed in me, Mick. People like you, but not anymore. I don't need to fight for your approval. Grandmother Hilda placed her hand gently on my shoulder. You never did, my dear. You were always the one who truly understood what it meant to build something real. The family was broken, their lies exposed. For the first time, I could see them for what they truly were, and for the first time, I felt free. Thank you, I whispered to Hilda, my heart swelling with gratitude. She smiled warmly, her expression softening. You've earned it, Ava. You always have. With that, we left the garage, the weight of the night slowly lifting. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone. The family's empire had crumbled under its own hypocrisy, and now it was my turn to rebuild, on my terms, with my own legacy. The air in the garage was thick with unspoken words, the tension nearly palpable as Leo and I stood side by side, facing the wreckage of my family. Mick, still seething from the exposure, paced restlessly in front of us. His eyes flicked between Leo and me, but he didn't speak. Jeanette stood beside him, her arms crossed, a tight expression on her face, while Devon, who had been silent through it all, avoided making eye contact. The glow of the garage lights seemed to amplify the coldness between us. It was as if time had slowed, giving me the space to finally say everything I had been holding back for years. I took a deep breath. You're right about one thing, Mick, I started, my voice measured. I'm not the same person I used to be. I've worked hard to get here, while you stayed stuck in your bitterness and resentment. He scoffed, the sound cutting through the silence. Worked hard? Or just took advantage of the system? You always act like you're some self-made success, but you're just lucky. Nothing more. I shook my head, feeling the weight of every moment, every sacrifice I had made. You think this was luck? I asked, my voice growing stronger. You think I'm just some opportunist who got lucky? I spent years working multiple jobs. I've fought tooth and nail for everything I've earned. I took a step toward him, not out of anger, but with the clarity of someone who had endured too much to turn back now. I didn't get to where I am by depending on people like you. I didn't get here by letting my past define me, and I didn't get here by standing still. Mick's face twisted with disdain, but before he could lash out again, I continued. I grew up in a condemned trailer lot, Mick. Yes, but I didn't just survive it. I turned it around. I restored that lot into affordable housing for families who didn't have a chance. And quietly, I bought up multiple properties while you were too busy tearing people down. His expression faltered, the shock flickering in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with another sneer. That doesn't make you special, Ava. It just means you're playing the game. Jeanette spat, her voice dripping with contempt. Look at you, a girl playing mogul? It's cute, really, but you'll never be the real thing. I could feel the sting of her words, but they no longer held the same power over me. I smiled, calm but deliberate, as I met her gaze. You want to talk about being real? I said, my tone sharp. Let's talk about the time you belittled my mother while she was dying of an autoimmune disease, Jeanette. You didn't even offer to help her with the medical bills, did you? No, you just turned your back and called her weak. Jeanette's face paled. I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced with defiance. You don't know what you're talking about, she hissed, but her voice wavered slightly. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, stepping even closer. You never cared, Jeanette. You never cared about me, about Mom, or anyone but yourself. And now you stand here, pretending like you have the right to judge me. Mick took a step toward me, his face twisted in a mix of anger and embarrassment. You think you're so much better than us now, huh? You think you're some kind of success? I met his gaze steadily, my heart pounding with a quiet strength I had never known I had before. I'm not better than you. I'm just not like you anymore. And that's the difference. There was a long, uncomfortable silence that followed, stretching between us like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had frozen, like my family was standing on the edge of a cliff, and all I had to do was push them over. But instead, I just stood there, knowing the truth. I didn't need them anymore. Leo's hand found mine again. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. The support, the love, it was all there, unwavering. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. "We're done here," I said, my voice final, clear. I turned away, my shoulders squared, the weight of everything I had fought for lifting off of me. The family was stunned, unable to move or speak, as I walked away, not with anger, but with a quiet finality. The ties that had bound me to them for so long had been severed. I was free. As we walked toward the car, Leo leaned down, his voice low. "You were incredible, Ava. You didn't just win tonight, you reclaimed everything." I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I had already won. 2 weeks had passed since that night in the parking garage. The weight of everything, the public humiliation, the quiet defiance, the ultimate shift, had finally settled into a kind of peaceful stillness. I stood barefoot in the middle of the lakeside villa that had once belonged to my mother, the sunlight pouring in through the windows, warming the wood floors beneath my feet. In the distance, the lake shimmered with a soft, golden glow, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The house was quiet, empty, but not in a lonely way. It was different now. The house, once a reminder of all the struggles and sacrifices, now felt like a place of peace. I wrapped my fingers around the coffee mug in my hand, the warmth comforting me as the reality of the last few weeks finally caught up to me. I could feel the tears welling up, but they weren't tears of sorrow. No, they were tears of relief, of letting go. Leo stepped up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his steady presence grounding me in that moment. "You didn't just survive, Ava," he whispered into my hair. "You redefined power." I nodded, letting his words sink in. There was so much I had fought for, so much I had given up. But now, standing in this place, I felt like I had not just rebuilt myself, but something even more important. I had reclaimed my story. Before I could say anything, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Grandmother Hilda standing on the threshold, her elegant cane tapping with purpose against the wood. She looked as poised as ever, but there was a softness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Can I come in, darling?" she asked, her voice carrying a warmth that immediately put me at ease. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She moved slowly, gracefully, and I couldn't help but notice the way the years had weighed on her silvery hair and the slight stoop of her shoulders. But there was a fire in her still. I had always admired that about her. Without a word, she reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a letter, along with a notarized document. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words. "It's done," she said quietly, her gaze softening as she met my eyes. "The estate is yours, Ava. The vineyard, the homestead, everything." I looked up, the magnitude of what she was saying sinking in. She wasn't just giving me property, she was passing the legacy, my mother's legacy, into my hands. "I stayed silent for too long, darling," Hilda continued, her voice steady but full of regret. "I watched as they all mistreated you, and I knew. I knew you were the one who had earned your place. You've done what none of them ever could." Her words, heavy with the weight of years, brought tears to my eyes. "I just wanted to be seen," I whispered, more to myself than to her. I wanted them to see me. "You were always seen," Hilda replied gently. "By me, at least. I knew you had it in you. You are the legacy now, and it's yours to carry forward." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the enormity of what was happening wash over me. The burden of always being overlooked, of always fighting for recognition, had lifted. I wasn't alone anymore. "You deserve this," she added, her voice thick with emotion. Before I could respond, there was a shift in the atmosphere. A familiar flutter of movement in the hallway caught my attention. It was Leo, standing in the doorway, watching the exchange with a knowing look. He stepped forward, his hand resting on my shoulder, his presence as grounding as ever. "Thank you," I said quietly to Hilda, my voice filled with gratitude. Hilda smiled and nodded. "No need to thank me. You've earned it, Ava. You've earned everything." The warmth in her eyes was a balm to my soul, the validation I had longed for, the kind I had never received from my parents or my uncle, was here now, and I was finally ready to take on the next chapter of my life, not in their shadow, but in my own light. I looked down at the documents again, the weight of them a symbol of the power I now held. I was no longer bound by the past. The house, the vineyard, the legacy, it was all mine now. But it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving something to them. It was about giving myself the freedom to define my future. Leo pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me. You've created something real, Ava, something that's yours, and I'll be with you, every step of the way. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace with what I had become. No more fighting for approval, no more playing the role they expected of me. This was my life now, and I was ready to lead it on my own terms. We stood there, in the sunlight streaming through the windows, as the past and future intertwined. It was more than just restoration, it was transformation. I had rebuilt myself, not from the ashes of who I was, but from the strength of who I had always been, and this was just the beginning. The brunch was uncomfortably silent as everyone gathered in my grandmother's old living room. The sun poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the room, and the smell of eggs and bacon filled the air. It should have been a peaceful gathering, a typical Sunday family brunch. But nothing about today was typical. I sat at the far end of the long table, Leo beside me. I didn't need to look around to know that Mick and Jeanette were still nursing their bruised egos. Devin had barely made eye contact with me since we arrived, his face pale and stiff, like he was just waiting for this to be over. The tension thickened when Mick stood up, his knees shaking slightly as he steadied himself with a hand on the back of his chair. He cleared his throat, his face grim. "All right," he muttered, looking around the room. "I've been an idiot." The words were heavy, grudging, as though they had been ripped from him. My heart didn't race, didn't jump with satisfaction. I had no desire to feel any pleasure from his admission. This wasn't about me. This was about him finally facing what he had done. "I've been bitter for too long," Mick said, his voice soft but strained, as though every word was an admission of failure. I've let my pride get the best of me. I've treated Ava like she was never enough." I felt the weight of his words, but I didn't speak. I simply watched him. His head was lowered now, his shoulders hunched under the invisible weight of the shame he had carried for years. The man who had always acted like he was better than anyone else, now reduced to this trembling figure standing before the family. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was entitled to things," Mick continued, his words now growing more uncertain. "I mocked Ava for working hard when I was the one who never bothered to. I've done things I'm not proud of." His eyes flicked toward Jeanette, who was sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands. Her tears, though silent, were a testament to how much they both had relied on their pride to shield themselves from the reality of what had been happening. Mick paused, letting out a heavy sigh before turning back to me. "Ava, I've been wrong," he said, the words coming out more broken now. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did. I've been a terrible person. I was too proud to admit it." "I'm sorry." I sat there, still and silent. Jeanette finally looked up, wiping her eyes, but her face was full of anger rather than remorse. "We're family, Ava," she said, her voice trembling. "We've been through so much. You can't just—" "I don't need your apology, Jeanette," I said, my voice cutting through her words like a knife. "Not anymore. You're right. We're related, but that doesn't make us family." Mick recoiled, as though my words had struck him harder than anything else he had heard in that moment. But it wasn't anger that filled me. It was relief. The validation I had been waiting for, the release of years of dismissal, finally echoed in the silence between us. I didn't need to wait for their approval any longer. Jeanette opened her mouth to speak, but I stood up, my gaze moving over the room one last time. It was over. I didn't need their validation to continue on the path I had chosen. I didn't need to keep fighting for the scraps of affection they'd never give me. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't for you. It was never about you." I turned on my heel, the room still silent in the wake of my words. As I walked out, Leo followed me quietly, his presence like a soft anchor to reality. The power had shifted. Permanently. Months passed since that fateful day in the parking garage. The air felt different now, lighter, as if I had finally shaken off a weight I'd been carrying for years. My life had changed, irrevocably, and I wasn't the same person anymore. There were no more waiting for approval, no more trying to prove myself to anyone. I had become the architect of my own future, and it was beautiful. Leo and I had poured everything into our green construction startup. What started as a passion project to help low-income communities was now a thriving business, and it was gaining momentum every day. We'd just finished securing funding for our next phase, and the future seemed more certain than it ever had before. But there was more to do. I'd always believed that if I had a chance, I could make the world better. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore, not even in reclaiming what belonged to me. I wanted to build something that would last. I stood in front of my computer, the glow from the screen illuminating my face. I had spent the morning finalizing the plans for the Ava Bremer Design Foundation. It would be my way of giving back, of creating something that could help others who had been overlooked, just like I had been. The foundation was designed to fund mentorships for aspiring architects from low-income families, giving them the opportunity to create the kind of change I had worked so hard for. This was my legacy, not the wealth I had amassed, not the properties I had reclaimed, but the lives I could touch by offering the same opportunities I'd fought for. "Hey, how's it going?" Leo's voice broke through my thoughts as he entered the room, his presence always grounding. I smiled at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. "I'm just finalizing the last details. It's all coming together." He stepped behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders, as he leaned down to kiss the top of my head. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" I nodded, staring at the screen in front of me. It's funny how everything has changed. I used to think I needed to fight for my place in this world. Now I know I don't have to fight anyone for anything. I just have to create it. Leo's hands tightened on my shoulders, and I could feel the warmth of his pride in me. "You've already created more than most could dream of, Ava. This foundation, your startup, it's just the beginning." I smiled, a deep sense of peace washing over me. It wasn't about the awards or the recognition. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, least of all my family. I had transcended the shame, the ridicule, the constant dismissal. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I had learned how to turn every moment of pain into fuel, into something that could lift others. Later that evening, as Leo and I sat on the porch of the lakeside villa, the sun setting behind us, I thought about how far I'd come. The laughter from that gala, the mockery, the feeling of being invisible, it all seemed so distant now. I had built my own place in this world, and it was a place of purpose. Some nights, I still remembered the mic feedback and the sting of mixed words, but those memories didn't hold me back anymore. They reminded me of the strength it took to overcome them. Every scar, every bruise, had been a part of my architecture. It was my foundation. "Ready for our next adventure?" Leo asked, his voice gentle, his hand warm in mine. I turned to look at him, a smile spreading across my face. "Absolutely." As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, not because I had become them, but because I had become myself, and that was everything.